Everyone, Jason here, bringing you another episode of Intro to Illustrator. Today's focus is going to be on the Pathfinder panel. And the Pathfinder panel is incredibly useful for building and creating a multitude of shapes. Instead of just going in and trying to draw or trace something, the Pathfinder allows you to subtract and add shapes and lines to actually begin to create all different types of shapes. So what I want to start off with is calling up the Pathfinder panel, which is under Window, Pathfinder. But you'll also be able to access the Pathfinder panel through the Properties panel as well. If you've got some shapes selected, you can go in and if I select a couple shapes, you'll notice the Pathfinder panel will pop up here. And it's only going to show up here when you have two or more objects selected. You'll notice if I only have one, Pathfinder doesn't show up. Because with the Pathfinder, you're going to be adding or subtracting shapes and lines. And again, you can click on that three little dot area to show the entire Pathfinder panel. I prefer to have the Pathfinder panel up and ready so that we have all of our content right here. Under the drop-down menu, there isn't a whole bunch of information here that we really need, and there's nothing hidden in this panel when you call it up. Everything is right there. Now, one of the interesting things about the Pathfinder panel is that we have the 4 different shape modes. And shape modes require 2 or more closed shapes. You cannot use an open path, say like a line, with any of these modes here and expect them to work. These are shape modes which require closed shapes. The Pathfinder modes down here do not require closed paths. You can mix and match shapes and open lines and have those work. They will not work here. So how does this work? Well, pretty simple. We're going to start with the Unite, which is going to be the add or the combine, whatever you want to call that. But it's the Unite feature. And how this works is pretty simple. If I take a shape and I take another shape here and select these 2 shapes at once, and I use the Unite feature, it is going to create one shape based on all those shapes that I've selected and put together. When I do that, those shapes now become one shape, and I've now formed a new shape. I'm going to undo that by doing Command or Control Z. Now what's interesting about the Unite is whatever shape is in front, those attributes win. Okay? If I were to bring this forward by going under the Object menu, under Arrange, Bring to Front. Now that blue shape is in front, and when I select those shapes and perform the Unite function, that is going to be the attributes that you see. So remember, what's in front always wins. Okay? Select that, put those all together. Very simple. I'm going to undo that. Now, the next function is going to be the minus front. It's very simple. Whatever shape is in front is going to be subtracted based on the other object in there. So if I use the minus front, this section is going to go away along with the object in back, and I'm left with just the object in back. Okay, so minus front is whatever is in front, covering up here, will simply go away, kind of like the cookie cutter effect. Now what's unique about this one is the results. Now I showed you 2 shapes, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you several shapes. In fact, I'll go in and I'm just using my Option or Alt click and drag to duplicate this numerous times. And I have multiple shapes. Now, it isn't uncommon for people to think, oh, if I use the minus front command here, everything that is overlapping here will disappear. It's not how it works. The last one drawn is the object in front. This is the last one that I drew, and this one's in front. And if I get rid of everything, it's going to get rid of every single thing that's in front of my lastmost object. Okay? And not just like, oh, this one's in front of this one, oh, and this one's, so it's just going to take out these little sections. No. In this case, the first one that you draw is the last one standing. And it will subtract everything in front. Okay? Now, this is another way of thinking about it. If you use your Unite feature, you'll always end up with one shape. If you use your minus front mode, you will always end up with one shape as well. Okay, no matter how many shapes you start with, you will end up with one shape. So the minus front takes everything that's in front of your firstmost, or your object that is behind everything else. And great way to create a little moon right there. The intersect is an interesting one as well, and we're going to try this one. I'm going to try two circles. I'm going to use my eyedropper tool to sample that color off the other object, and I'm going to duplicate these two and select both of these. The intersect is going to give me just the intersected area where they do overlap. So when I do the intersect, I lose all the other content, and it only shows me where it intersects right there. Again, no matter how many objects you have, let me do 3 objects here. I undid this. I'll do 3 objects, and the resulting overlap is going to give me only the area where all those objects overlap. Okay, not just 2, all of them. And remember, just like the unite and the minus front, the intersect will always end up with one shape, always. The last object, last mode I want to show you is going to be the exclude. And the exclude works opposite of the intersect, where when you have overlapping objects, it just simply knocks out that portion. And when you knock out that portion, it actually creates a hole so you can see through that. Very important. Now what's unique about this is if I take all these 3 shapes and I do the exclude, it does something really interesting. What it does is what's called the even-odd overlap. And this is really fascinating how this works. And the even-odd overlap works like this. If I have the one shape, and this shape is on top of it, okay, or behind it, doesn't matter, just as long as they're interacting with each other. This is an even number of objects producing one shape. So if I do this, it's going to knock it out. Now what's interesting, when I have an odd number of objects, okay, so even is going to knock it out. When I have 3 overlapping on everything, okay, so this one is overlapping, this one's overlapping, this one is, in this area, and I perform this intersect, I will leave a shape. So even numbers knock out, odd numbers show up or remain. So something interesting to keep in mind with that exclude option. One more thing that I want to show you with the exclude that can be also very interesting is this. I'm going to draw another shape here on top of this one. And I'm just going to color it a different color so we can see. And the color doesn't really matter. I'm just going to position it so it's right there. I can do what's called the donut feature. Okay? They don't need to be overlapping like this, partially overlapping. You can overlap them directly and use the intersect feature to punch a hole in the middle of it. Okay? And then, of course, there's an actual hole. I didn't just put a white circle over the top of it, because that's not very good building in Illustrator, but I actually did what's called the donut hole. And I sometimes refer to the exclude as the donut hole option. Now, if they're partially overlapping, they're going to leave that vacant space right there. And you can see that it is that vacant space. Or you can do the donut hole. Now, what's interesting is that these are still separate shapes. Okay? And it's not something that I can go in and ungroup and get actually ungroup these 2 shapes. However, I can do something quite interesting. And that is going to be isolation mode. If I select this, what we call a compound shape, it is 2 shapes making up a singular shape. That's what a compound shape is. I can select this with my selection tool and then double click. And I'm going to go into what's called isolation mode. The gray bar appears at the top of my screen. I get this little blue underline. Everything else goes gray, and now the object that I double-clicked on is isolated from everything else. You can see the path that it took here. We're on the first layer here. We've gotten into our compound path, and now we can select the object, but I can also select the compound object, which means I can then move this around independently. It's not really grouped together. It's a compound path. When I'm done, the easiest way to get out of this is simply hit Escape. Okay? So if I go and select this one, and I double-click, get into isolation mode, and I move this around, you'll see it doesn't work the same way. And the reason why is because the way these were partial overlaps. When you get a full overlap, like the donut here, that full overlap is different. That full overlap does allow you to get that compound effect no matter where you move it, as long as they are completely overlapping. Hit escape to get out of isolation mode. If they're partially overlapping, you can't perform the same trick. Interesting little note. Now, one of the things with shape modes is this. I cannot take an open line and bring this with another object and try to unite these together. Doesn't work. Okay? No matter what I do here, it's not going to give me what I'm looking for. This requires closed shapes. When I do the unite, it's like, okay, what happened? Well, what happened was you had a shape in the background, you had a line in front of you, and when you united those shapes together, it just said, well, we're going to keep the shape, and you've got an orange line in front, and I don't know what to do with the line, so let's just acquire the attributes of the orange line and call it good. Probably not what you think was going to happen. Minus front, it just simply gets rid of your line. Doesn't like knock out an area there because it's like gone. Okay, undo that. With the intersect here, it tells you, sorry, don't know what to do because I need two overlapping paths here. It just doesn't do it. Same thing with the intersect. It just gets rid of it and does the same thing that unite. It's a frustrating thing. Just remember, shape modes require shapes. Once you put shapes together, you're totally fine. Okay? But until then, it's not going to work. So here's a trick. Okay? When you have a path, say I've got a path like this, and I would like to merge these together, you have to turn this into a shape. Once this path becomes an actual shape, and how do you know? Well, let's go into outline mode. Go under View, Outline, which is Command or Control Y. You can see that this is a line and this is a shape. Okay? Go back. This, just by looking at this, I can't tell that this is a line, but if I try to select it, I realize that it is a line because I don't have the bounding box. Going into outline mode, you can clearly see that that's a line. I'm going to convert this line into a path. I'm going to copy it because I'm going to use this line later. I'm going to take this line and I'm going to go under the Object menu, down to Path, and I'm going to choose Outline Stroke. I'm going to go out into my outline mode, and now I can see that this is an actual shape. And now, shape modes will now allow me to use any of my shape mode functions to get exactly what I want out of this. Okay? So this is a shape, this is a path. You can't really tell, but Command or Control Y goes into outline mode, and you can see which is which. Very important. Now, the Pathfinder modes down here allow you to mix and match both of them. And both of them, I mean shapes and open paths. What I like about this feature is this. If I wanted to chop something in half, I can draw a line, say, over, let's grab my little egg here, and I'm going to draw a line over the egg. I'd like to divide this egg right here. If I select that shape and that path, just think of that path as being a pair of scissors. The thickness of the line doesn't matter. In reality, when we go into outline mode, this line just simply is a line that doesn't have any thickness to it. If I use a shape and a line, or a line and a line, or a shape and a shape, doesn't matter, because when I go into Pathfinder, you can mix and match shapes and paths. The first one is the divide function, and that line that I had across there acts as a divider. It just cuts it in half. Something to keep in mind, anything that happens from the Pathfinder modes here, you always end up with a grouped object in the end. Always. Okay? Now you can double click to isolate and then pull these pieces apart and then hit escape to get back out, but you'll notice here in my isolation mode, it's always a group. Okay? So if you want to ungroup it, you can go under Object, Ungroup, which is Shift-Command-G or Shift-Control-G on a PC, and ungroup them. Just keep in mind, anytime you use the Pathfinder mode, it will always group them together. Always. Now, I can go in here and I can use multiple lines. All right? Now, even though you don't see the lines when I let go, the reason why you're not seeing the lines is because I don't have any attributes applied to the line. There is no color, and there is no stroke weight on the line. Doesn't matter. If I go into outline mode, you can see that all those could be little cuts. If I'd like to divide it this way, this is a great way to do it. I use the divide function, okay? And then I can click on my shapes here, and I can ungroup the whole thing using my Shift Command G. And now you can see if I go back into preview mode, I now have all these separate sections divided up, kind of like a shader. Okay, kind of interesting. Next is going to be the trim function. And the trim function is pretty simple. If I take two shapes, and they can be the same color, they can be different colors, the trim function will just simply take any place that those objects are overlapping and just simply trim them, okay? So that you don't have any overlap whatsoever. If you get into the printing world and you have to do trapping, which is something that we do to make sure the colors actually match up and touch each other in printing, this could be quite useful. Not something I use very often at all. The next one's going to be the merge function. And the merge function is interesting because the merge function allows me to do kind of what we would do with the unite function right here. I'm going to take these two shapes, grab these together, and I'm going to use the merge function. Okay. Now it's like, okay, so what did it just do? Well, it seems like it did what the trim function did. I'm going to double click to isolate. It looks like it just took out those overlapping areas. Well, this is because I didn't show you the really awesome feature that the merge has. And this is something that is extremely obscure. Here's how the merge function works. Say I've got several blue shapes here, and I've got several orange shapes here. Okay? And I select all those, and I merge those together. It's going to merge all of the blue together. It's going to merge all of the orange together. And in the end, it ends up trimming them as well, which is pretty amazing. Okay? So it's actually a pretty cool function. So if you try this with just two singular objects, it doesn't look like it's going to be doing much at all. But it does. It actually picks up the common attributes and will merge all of those together, but it won't merge them with uncommon attributes. So kind of an interesting way of creating a complex creation and being able to merge that together very simply just by common attributes. I like that. The next one here is going to be the crop function. And the crop function is pretty interesting. If I have a shape here and I decide that I'd like to put another shape over it or behind it, and I take my objects here and I use the crop function, the object on top is going to act like a window, okay? Very much like you're framing artwork. So if I was framing some artwork, I can put my shape in front, put my artwork behind, select those objects, and simply crop them, and it crops right to there. Let me go into outline mode, and you can see that it kind of leaves my window there, okay? Kind of like as a picture frame. Like now it becomes clear, and then this object is in here. And if I double click into isolation mode, it's completely chopped off. You can see that it's, now a section of this. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting way to do something like this. Now if I add a third object in here, let me grab this triangle. I'm going to add a third object in here as well. I'm going to select everything. Keep in mind the object in front is your picture frame. Anything that's behind it is going to be cropped so that it stays inside that frame. So this triangle and this donut are both going to be cropped only inside that frame. Okay? Now you'll notice something interesting. Because this triangle had a border on it and a fill, and I selected everything and I cropped it, I lost the border around my object. It's just something that happens when you use this crop feature. Okay? Something to keep in mind. If I want to go in and I want to convert these all to outlines, it is both going to divide and create outlines with my object. And then I can double click and I can isolate each and every one of these outlines. A little bit hard to grab, but every place where those overlap, each segment is now going to be its own separate outline, its own separate shape. It's interesting. One thing that is weird is that it looks like these lines are very wavering. This is actually a kind of an anomaly with the way it draws, okay? So it doesn't look like it's a totally smooth line right there, and it is kind of weird with that. If we isolate this and get this back in here, it's because there's like no stroke applied to the line, okay? And what's weird is that, You can turn the stroke off, but that anomaly, you just have to go in, you have to choose a color and then add a line weight. All right, I know it looks really weird and it looks all crazy and bumpy, but it's orange with a 0-point stroke weight. Why it actually shows up this way is this kind of weird kind of choppiness, I'm not sure. But keep that in mind. It's not you, it's how Illustrator does that. I'm going to get back out of our isolation mode, back into it. And then the last mode that we have here is minus back, which is interesting because this is minus front right here and this is minus back. So of course, if we put these two together and we use minus front, frontmost object goes away, leaving us the back object. Or minus back, it just simply takes out the back object, just like it did. One thing I want to talk to you about, though, is when we use this minus back or front feature, is that it does not take into account the stroke weight of an object, okay? It only takes into account the actual bounding line of the object. So it doesn't go all the way out here and chop it off. It only goes, if we are under our preview mode, which is Command or Control Y, it's just going to use the basic shape as the cookie cutter to go ahead and remove that. So if you have an outline around here and you'd like it to go to the outside of the outline here, then you have to do something completely different. And that would be you go to your stroke, and that way you could change stroke and put it on the inside. And then that means that your object edge is right here. So when you do the minus front or minus back, it will go right to that edge. Just a really weird thing, okay? So it does not take into account the thickness of the stroke when you're doing something like that. So all these great things. Now, here's one thing. This expand button. This expand button has been grayed out the entire time. What is that expand button? Well, what's interesting is when we go in and we take a shape here, I'm just going to copy this, paste it over here. If I were to take a couple shapes like this, and I were to select them, and I want to unite them together, when I hover over this, it's going to say Option click or Alt click to create a compound shape and add to shape area. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I showed you with the donut, a compound shape is when you can go in and you have a compound shape like this. Okay, and I'm going to do my donut again so you can understand this a whole lot better. I'm going to put that over the top, do a compound shape. Compound shape is two or more shapes that make up a shape, but it's still one shape. Okay? Well, what this is saying when you hover over this is if you'd like to go in and you'd like to say, just get this overlap right here, and you click on this, all you're left with is that overlap. And I'm going to go into outline mode and you can see that. Okay? So there's the two shapes. I do the intersect. I end up with that shape. But what this says by holding down your Option or your Alt key, when you Option or Alt click here, you're going to get the results, but it's going to leave you these shapes to then edit that compound path. Now you'll notice when these two came together, just so you can see, I didn't just click this. What I did is I Option or Alt click this. There's my shapes. Now the expand button is active. And what this is this allows me to go in, double click to isolate one of the shapes here, okay? And I can move this shape around so I can change how those things overlap or unite or exclude, okay? And then I hit escape to get back out of it. So I'm not stuck with the end result here. I have the shapes there for me that I can then double click and isolate and use if I'd like to change the overall appearance of that object instead of having to redo them. I hit escape to get back out of isolation mode. And then if I've got my final shape and I no longer want those shapes that I used, kind of my template, then I can hit the expand, and it's going to expand the compound shape, getting rid of those shapes that created it and leaving me with just the end shape. So this could be quite helpful when you're going through and you're creating shapes here with overlaps, and you may not be absolutely sure that the shape that you've created is what you want. So instead of just clicking on these, hold down your Option or Alt and click on them, the result in the end will look exactly the same. However, you will have the ability to then edit those shapes by double-clicking and isolating those shapes and changing the resulting compound path. And then, once you are done, Then you can click expand if you want to. Not necessary at all. You can leave it just like this. There's nothing wrong with that. Work just fine. So, pretty cool stuff for the Pathfinder. Now, if you like this, one of the things you definitely want to check out my video on the Shape Builder tool. The Shape Builder tool has a lot of attributes that the Pathfinder does, but it does things that the Pathfinder doesn't. And subsequently, the Pathfinder panel does things that the Shape Builder tool doesn't do either. And I use both because both the Shape Builder tool and the Pathfinder tool are extremely useful, very powerful tools. Amazing the way that you can combine shapes together to be able to create any type of icon or logo or infographic instead of having to go in and actually draw each and every shape. I basically call this creation by addition and subtraction, merging things together, knocking things out, and creating this. And the Pathfinder panel, definitely have to use this because it's going to be absolutely amazing once you master this.